Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to the book club, to Tragedy and Hope, chapter 16, The New Age. Just want to check, can everyone see my screen? Fiona, can you just let me know?
Yes, I can see.
Oh, good. Okay, thank you guys. Okay, so we're gonna start. So we've made a little bit of a interactive timeline because Quigley jumps quite a bit, and we wanted to put things in context. So we're going to look at the New Age, and the New Age has got 3 chapters in it. It's got the introduction, and we're going to spend a lot of time with the introduction. Our aim is to give comments. We are not going to do the whole chapter because we will assume that you've read it, basically. So we're just going to give feedback and comments, and then introduction, and then we've got hold on, rationalization and science, and then the 20th century patterns. Okay, let's start. Okay, so I have to say, Quigley, I mean, Fiona and I were discussing, he's a very difficult read. He writes very oddly. But looking at this first paragraph, I just couldn't get past it because he was referring to the contradictory services for the social context in which it occurs. Okay, so, and I couldn't understand what that was, and it really bothered me. So I looked up. But basically, Quigley is referring to the changes that happened in the mind of the defeated. And the changes are actually about who is in power, the actual power. And he also refers to how it alters reality itself. But basically, if you look at Japan, and obviously there are many that have been defeated, but I just want to focus on Japan and on Germany specifically, because it really clarifies it. Japan has, before the war, had quite a different cultural society. They've also had a different economic structure than what we have in the West. So the Japan's economy, they were mainly state controlled, especially by the military, and they had something that is called a zaibatsu industry. So this is basically like family-owned industry. So you'd have Mitsui, Mitsubishi, Sumitomo back in the day. I mean, I know about Mitsubishi, I think we all do. So that actually comes from before the war. And there were no, shall we say, capitalism. There was no consumerism, like, you know, people were very much collective in their thinking, very much concerned about the security and the welfare of the community, of the country, a lot of patriotism. So there were no individual wealth. So this is very important, I think, because this is a big problem for the elites. And we all know that with H.G. Wells, where he's mentioned in the outline of history of the undesirable races, which are the Irish, I think the black race, the Scottish. And if you look at these, what all of them have in common is they struggle to adapt to new methods and to new structures and to the new economy and to the new society. They still keep within their old cultural ways. So that is, I think, been a problem during World War II. And we'll go into that. The same as with Germany. I mean, Germany was quite self-sufficient, very independent. So what happened was you had the Marshall Plan. The Marshall Plan had various countries. I mean, here you can see all the different countries that were involved. So I'm just highlighting two of them, Germany and Japan. And with the Marshall Plan, they were providing financial support, you know. This was basically to rebuild the country after the disaster. But with that, they had these terms and conditions. And the terms and conditions basically meant that they had to relinquish certain values that they had. So, for example, Japan had completely gone from being very self-sufficient, state-controlled. They had to relinquish the independence and go into a free market practice. So basically, export all their goods. All right. So now clearly we know why they wanted to move them into the free market, so that they can start with their corporate control, right? It's basically, okay, you're looking out for the best interest of your people, but now we are going to override whatever policies and rules you've got, and we're going to have a contract with you, and you're going to agree to that terms. And in so doing, they basically undermine sovereignty. And the same as with Germany. They became quite a big exporter. They had to relinquish the Reichsmark and replace it with the Deutschmark. And so it's kind of like a soft takeover. And this whole Marshall Plan was geared at building the superpower, which is the West. Okay. So when Quigley talks about this contradictory services for the social context in which it occurs, he's first of all, again, he's referring to the minds that changed, okay? And it changed in terms of, I think what it means is who they thought were in power was actually not these countries, but it's the bankers and it's the financial institutions. I think that might not have been as clearly obvious to them. And the second thing, which is, as he says, and on the other hand, it alters the factual situation itself, so that changes which in peacetime might have occurred over decades are brought about in a few years. I'll get back to that. But basically, Japan, okay, so Japan is the defeated country. Now the US is pumping a lot of money and a lot of support. And now suddenly Japan is rising and becoming stronger than the US economy. And this is not the reality. It kind of contradicts the whole point of having the Marshall Plan, right? It kind of goes, it changes the reality itself of, shall we say, the narrative. So this is quite interesting, and we will come back to this because, yeah, there's a reason, of course, that Japan has been a big issue for them. So yeah, I just want to open the floor. Are there any comments or any feedback from anyone? No. Okay.
Well, I couldn't find my little thing to click on it and make a comment, but I wanted to say that this is a great presentation, Andrea.
Cool.
It's a great idea, sharing the screen and showing all of this. It's very engaging. Thank you very much.
Cool. No, that's good to hear. Okay, so let's just move on. We are going to focus a lot on the introduction. I think the reason for it that Fiona and I felt is how this applies to today. So I want to look at this particular paragraph here, but basically what we are having is we are having an age of experts. And one of the things, oh yes, before I forget, because one of the things that Alan Waters mentioned was that in peacetime, if you might recall, he has mentioned that they basically that war brings accelerated change, and what would have taken a few decades to do will be done in basically less when you have war. So yeah, just let's quickly have a look at the age of experts. Actually, I do want to move on to something else. I know I'm going to jump. This is going to be a jumpy session. That's the whole point of it. Carroll quickly talks about the three blocks. Let me quickly go there. Where is it? He talks about, you might recall also that Karl Marx mentioned the 3 trading blocks. Okay, so he's basically saying that, so some of these changes that have come are obvious. It's a shift from democracy to an age of experts, from a world dominated by Europe and even by Britain to a world divided into 3 great blocks. Because remember, you had all the colonies, and it was mainly Europe and Britain that had those colonies. And now it's moved to the 3 great blocks. So let's quickly have a look at these. So here we've got the 1950s, just after the war, after the bomb. And we're going to have a look at these 3 blocks. So on the one hand, let me just quickly go down. Okay, so on the left, we've got the communist bloc. Okay, this was basically Eastern Europe and China and Russia. So we also have like a few other countries back in the day. So Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, and so on. As these obviously changed and moved over to the West. But yes, you had the communist bloc on the one side, and Marxism, Leninism, Maoism. Then on the right-hand side, you've got the Western bloc, which was all the English-speaking countries, the US, the UK, and then Western Europe. And then underneath here, which is not really spoken of much, is the neutralic bloc, which is Asia, Africa, Latin America. So with these blocks, basically, this is actually setting the stage for the narrative, because Quigley viewed these blocks as reflective of the broader shift of global power dynamics between during the 20th century. So it's what it is if you look at the Mason law, you have the dialectic, you have a conflict, and the conflict has been in those days between communism and freedom. I say freedom in quotation marks, the free world, the West. Even the Marshall Plan was brought in by, oh, we don't want the communists to take over. You know, this was used in a sense as a fear to bring in more of the agenda. So I just want to quickly read here in my notes. So Quigley also recognized the potential for these blocks to evolve over time as economic, political, and technological forces that reshape the interdependence of these countries. Because the main aim was to take away dependence, to bring in free trade. It sounds so good, but it's so bad. To bring in corporations, and for corporations to then take over government policies, and to with their policies, not only through the UN, but also through trade, make each country interdependent on the other. So, and the way they did that was through the narrative of, oh, we don't want communism. We want a free world. So just quickly to focus on the neutralic bloc. So the neutralic bloc, which is mainly Africa, Asia, and Latin America, a lot of, especially like these countries, have been colonies. So the aim was actually to lift them up, to focus on decolonization. The decolonization is also part of not having the West have too much power, because, so they also wanted these European countries who had colonies to relinquish them. So within the 20th century, you will note that the IMF and the World Bank is always focused on Africa. That's actually where they started, especially in the 60s and the 70s. They were very much providing loans for Africa. Let me quickly just see here. So the role was the non-aligned movement to advocate for an independent path in global affairs. So they wanted these colonies to be more independent. So something to remember moving forward, this is my understanding, that you have Agenda 2063. It's different to Agenda 21. It falls under Agenda 21. But Africa, for example, will be used as a resource for the other two blocks, for the other trading blocks. It's not going to fall and have exactly the same as the other two. That's also why it's a bit of a different color there. So, yeah. Okay, let's move on. Okay, just gonna go back here for a bit. Yeah, let's have a look at just see. Okay. Fiona, do you want to maybe make any comments?
No, I think you're covering the introduction good.
Okay.
Just I'll jump in when we go to the Puritans and the rationalization thing.
Okay, all right.
Are you ready to go there, or do you want?
Yeah, I think because I think the age of expert. Let me cover one bit. Let me just cover one bit over here. Yeah. Okay. Let me just do this page. Okay, the age of experts. So basically, what has happened is beforehand there was the period of democracy. So most of the countries were self-ruling. They had colonies, and then there was a shift over to the age of experts. So where science rules. And something that is very interesting is this book from C.S. Lewis, which is because he speaks about globalization via Scientology, basically, or via scientism. So the book is called The Hideous Strength. It was printed in 1945. Basically, what he says is that scientism is the method to bring a global government. That there is, he's not against science, because science is used for good, but he's against the over-reliance on science. So when science is used as a means of control, especially if it strips humanity of its moral values. And Alan Watt also mentioned this. He said that individuals give them a problem because they are unpredictable. So what science does is it dehumanizes the individual. And the quote from Alan Watt in 2006 was, he was saying, the bulk of the population are easy to predict, but it's the individuals in society that give them problems because they are unpredictable. Because what science does is or let me rather say, science in this context, it brings control. It's a means of bringing control. Let me quickly see here. It basically strips the approach of having moral and spiritual values in favor of a cold mechanical efficiency. So Lewis is reflecting on the fear he had of scientism, that it was divorced from morality. And he was saying that dreams of scientific planning, like dreams of old-style empire, end with the nations reduced to provinces under the World Organization, which is controlled by individuals behind the scenes. And that is basically where they were heading towards. Because if you look at all of these organizations that have been created, they do work like provinces. You look at the IMF, which deals with obviously giving loans, the World Bank in a similar ilk. We've got the WHO, it's like the Department of Health. Then you have the United Nations and various smaller agencies that work under them. I was wanting to put them all, but it is impossible. There are so many. But you get an idea. UNESCO, which brings in education, as Alan Watt mentioned, that whenever they bomb a country, like in Iraq, they always bring in UNESCO and they always bring in the IMF, because they're teaching the younger generation, they're indoctrinating them, and they're binding them with new policies and terms so that there can be no sovereign government. So, yeah, it's very interesting there. I think the World Trade Organization is also quite an important one, because this also ties in with we will get to it later, with John Dee and the trade routes that he helped form in the 19th century. So yeah, the Maritime, the Food and Agriculture Organization, Intellectual Property, all of these organizations have been basically created during the 1940s and 1950s. Some of these organizations are like hand-me-down, shall I say, from the League of Nations. So the League of Nations was their attempt to having a United Nations, and it basically failed. One of the reasons why it failed is because it didn't have any clout. It was almost like good in theory, but not in practice. And my guess is why it wasn't having any bite was because there was no financial incentive. Like, the borrower is a slave of the lender. So if they're lending money, they can set the terms. But with the League of Nations, they couldn't really get it going because they weren't lending money, basically. And that's my layman understanding. So yeah. Okay, I think, Fiona, I'm going to shall I hand it over? Hold on. Just quickly. Yes, I'm going to hand over to you. We're going to have a look quick at the Puritans.
Okay, Andrea, thank you. We can just sort of...
I just realized I can't mute my mic.
Before the Puritans, I was actually thinking of commenting on the experts. About the experts. From the Quigley saying it went from age of sort of democracy to experts, and I wanted to come with a sort of a guy called Ulrich Beck.
Oh yeah.
And mention he's a sociologist, German, and he's questioned this whole experts, and he says that we live in the risk society where everything around us is a kind of risk, from the air you breathe to the food you eat with fish filled with mercury and fillings getting put in your mouth with mercury in them. And he says that say you go to a doctor with a back problem, you ask for a second opinion when they tell you need an operation. So you go to another doctor and then they say, if you take that operation, you'll be lame. So in a way, these experts aren't really experts. And so you're told to trust the science, and there's all this science, there's these experts, and science is also corrupted. How they corrupt data and the statistics and all that, and they change it, and there's this peer-reviewed papers, etc. So where it's all kind of like becomes so corrupted. Money's behind the pharmas. Look what they've done to hide all the dangers of certain vaccines, etc. So in a way, you can't trust the experts. You've got to trust yourself and try and find out as much as you can. And it's very difficult for us to do that. So this was a point that Quigley's made. And I think in a way it's like as if to say, Quigley's trying to say, hey, trust the science. Because he was, one of them. And as I looked at the book, Quigley mentions the Puritans. And I wondered, what was his kind of point with the Puritans? Why was he going on about that? And then when he goes into rationalization later on, I thought, this is Weber. This is a sociologist and historian called Max Weber, who lived between 1860 and 1920. I thought, this is pure Weber. I know that I recognized what he was saying. And there was one thing that was interesting, because he said that, well, if I just first say what the Puritan people were like, he focused on Calvinism, because the Protestants broke away from Catholicism and they went in sort of two directions. There was Luther, I think his name was Martin Luther, and then there was John Calvin. And John Calvin was a much stricter Puritan Protestant type person, and he went to Scotland, amongst other his religion was spread there, or his direction of it. And in Scotland's it was pretty Calvinistic. And what it was this idea that only a small number of people are chosen for salvation. And in addition, with Calvinism, it entailed the idea of predestination. People were predestined to be either among the saved or among the damned. So there was nothing that the individual or the religion as a whole could do to affect that fate. So, yet the idea of predestination left people uncertain about whether they were among the saved. So to reduce that uncertainty, the Calvinists developed the idea that signs could be used as indicators of whether a person was saved. People were urged to work hard, because if they were diligent, they would uncover the signs of salvation, which were to be found in economic success. So if you were rich, or if you had money, you were chosen by God, because that was a sign that you were chosen. So in some, it says here, the Calvinist was urged to engage in intense worldly activity and to become a man of vocation. So I wondered, what's the relevance of this that Quigley's saying? And then that kind of way of life of saving your money, they pumped that then into the ones who had the most money would put it back into the companies, and hence it gave rise to this, capitalism. So because they had money, the industries could keep going. And Weber wrote a book called The Spirit of, I'll come back to that. But anyway, the other thing is, it led to the development of formal rationality. This way of life, this Calvinism. It's this, the spirit of capitalism, and this it led to this rational way of being able to be rational about life on earth, and gave rise to the spirit of capitalism, to working, to being industrious, and just living frugally and saving the money and being very disciplined, self-disciplined. And this discipline involved not spending money, not having any, fancy stuff, and that was a forerunner for rationalism. So, do you want to comment that?
Yes. You know
Andrea?
what? I think because what is very interesting is that even if I was thinking earlier, you know, science, especially in the 20th century, not maybe so much today, because I think, but in the 20th century, they really avoided anything pertaining to the mind or the spirit, or the soul. Today you have them veering into the consciousness, which is, you could say it's the same thing, but they dare not call it the soul. And it is exactly that. They were starting here because people were quite, shall we say, heavenly minded. They had their religious ideologies. They were very concerned about the soul. And this appeal to authority is in the way of a scientism or a scientocracy. It's in the way. It needs to be done away with. So I think one of the ways of getting rid of that values and principles is by obviously bringing in more just one sec, the fulfillment of the body, to indulge. So you had more advertising going, and it's all about what you can own, materialism, what you can consume, your comfort. It was all about food, all about traveling, all about the self. It wasn't about saving. So this is what was starting to happen in the 50s. And I just want to quickly look at something here, which is who was it? There was just bear with me. Yes, it's here, because this is what Carroll Quigley says. He says that basically, just thinking now, sorry guys, I just remembered something and I actually want to mention it. Do you remember that thing, Fiona, we were talking about, that it seemed like Carroll Quigley, that they, where he says, talking about this, and the 18th century had been a long age of struggle to get free from this older 17th century outlook, which is this, what you were just talking about, being heavenly minded, and the spiritual soul, being concerned about what happens after death and so on. It had been a long struggle to get free of this thinking, and it had been so prolonged largely because those who turned away from the 17th century could neither envisage nor agree upon the newer ideology they wanted to put in the place of the older one they wished to reject. So they agreed upon rejecting this old way, but they couldn't agree upon the new ideology. And that is very interesting, because for me that says, who is the they? It's probably the elites. They couldn't agree. So there must have been some kind of disagreement there. But Carroll Quigley does mention later on that there were in 1908 that George Sorrell wrote a book on reflections on violence. And basically he was saying that just as part of the narrative of the three blocks, that they moved away and they rejected irrationality. So in 1908, George Sorrell's Reflections on Violence argues that violence is a necessary force for social change, particularly in the context of revolution. He believes that myth and violent action can inspire and unite the working class, challenging existing political and social structures. So maybe this was one of the disagreements they had, why they couldn't progress. Maybe the one way of thinking was, we want to have violence. And maybe that's what they actually did. And then later on realized, no, actually, we don't want to go down the violent route. Because you were saying that it is, this way of thinking is irrational. It is reactionary. It is like fascism. And this also ties in with, that's my layman understanding of the 3 blocks. And on the other hand, what they did want to go with was with science, with reason, with rationalism, universal principles, and voluntary cooperation. So basically, Quigley uses rationalization to describe the process of simplifying or systematizing complex ideas, institutions, or behaviors to make them fit into a logical, orderly framework. Okay, so that is what he says, but that's not what I think that's not what I think they actually wanted to do. This is my opinion. I think that they wanted to do away with the appeal of authority. That it's not the irrational they wanted to do away with. They wanted to do away with moral principles, with spiritual values. They didn't want humans to rely on their senses. But and I just wrote here, the subconscious means to justify behavior to make it seem rational or socially acceptable. Oh, I don't know what I wrote there. Sorry, must be a little mistake. But just what ties in with it, with this thinking is also, bear with me, is what I want to highlight is this, like how this is applied today. I mean, one of the things that I've noticed that they do whenever it comes to trusting the science is they compartmentalize it. They don't give you the full picture. So, for example, if you look at a bridge, okay, if you want to cross a bridge, you have a 99.7% chance of that bridge actually collapsing. So you are not going to wear a life jacket when you cross that bridge, because that would be ridiculous. You've got a 99% chance of it not collapsing. So you're going to survive when you cross that bridge. But what they've done during COVID is they've gotten everyone to be so fearful of the virus, which has got you have a 99.7% survival rate. Okay. So, but with that fear and with the language and with compartmentalizing the science, they managed to get people to wear a life jacket to go and get that injection. And this is, I think, the dangers of using science in the wrong way can go. And one of the quotes that really struck is this from Terence McKenna. What we call reality is in fact nothing more than a culturally sanctioned and linguistically reinforced hallucination. It's basically, it's just using words, really, when you think of it. But it's using words in such a way that they trick us. It's a deception. And I think this is not only with pertaining to governments or policies or economy, but I think that it will also lead to creating a one world religion and using that language to trick people. I don't know if Fiona or if anyone else might have anything that they would like to add.
Yeah, I was wanting to go a little bit back to the rationalization of that Quigley's talking about, and science, and then what he thinks has happened in the in that at that time, with because rationalization is actually a sort of process where the things are done in it's a way of doing things. Like it's an emphasis on calculability, where things can be quantified and there's a focus on efficiency. There's a focus on predictability. So that means that if you could do an experiment or something one way, somebody else can do it and they'll get exactly the same results. And there's and so ultimately all this reduces human technology and replaces that with non-human, i.e. you've got the computers, because they're more predictable. They're going to give you maybe more predictable answers than humans would. And also all this is going to try to gain control over uncertainties that human beings can pose, and also there's irrational consequences if people are involved in the systems and doing stuff, so they try to keep it like that. When actually Weber was talking about this in 1910, up to about that, he said that there's a problem where they could produce an iron cage where people will become dehumanized and in a restrictive environment, and there's a loss of individuality and creativity. And we see that in modern jobs. People can feel alienated, because they lose contact with the products. In the chapter here, Rationalization in Science, Quigley said that the rationalization and science was first noted really when they used it in the factories. And what they did was they started to measure, for example, they'd have a conveyor belt, and they started to measure how somebody could, how quick it took for them to do certain acts. And they would actually have measure tapes and all sorts of things as they did this. And the book Scientific Management was written by Taylor, and also then Fordism was another name applied to the same process, where Henry Ford took that into the making of the cars. Because before somebody could make a car, they'd start at the beginning and they'd finish it. And then that changed to somebody putting on a screw, somebody putting on the tires, somebody putting on all these sort of things. But in doing that, people became alienated, and also it became monotonous, it became dehumanizing, it became very frustrating. So Quigley then goes on to say that's where they first started that, and they started to then look at it in science, and they introduced all this calculability into war,
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And can I just add to what you're saying? Because I was actually, after our talk this afternoon, I was actually adding a quote here as well from exactly Frederick Taylor. He says here, this was on Wiki, he argues the necessity of focusing on training rather than finding the right man, stating that in the past the man has been first, but in the future the system must be first. And this is quite aligned with where Klaus Schwab is heading with the fourth industrial revolution, because it basically, back then, like you were saying, they were replacing all the managers with robots. But here, because Taylor, he focused on prioritizing the system over the individual, like you were saying. This is exactly how the fourth industrial revolution is also. They are more automation. But I think what's different from back then and where we are now is that they're adding data. Everything is data driven. It's automation, data driven, and AI led. So they've kind of evolved it. So yeah, just quickly saying here, Taylor's ideas about standardizing tasks, training workers to fit systems, and optimizing efficiency laid the groundwork for 4IR's focus on automating repetitive tasks and using real-time data to improve processes. So I'm just thinking of, whenever someone says real-time data, I always think of the credit score system. I always think of, oh, you're driving and the GPS is picking up, have you used too much petrol, you know? So that's always what comes to mind, because even if you look at like 5G, it's not really a faster connection. It's more about the upload that's more rather than the download that's more. So they really are evolving. Just good to see both approaches aim to transform work by prioritizing systems and adaptability over individual skills. So yeah, I just wanted to interject that, what you were saying.
Yeah, that was interesting there. Quigley states in the book that actually the British began using the rationalization in war, and later the Americans came in. And then he starts to mention that mostly this Professor Blackwell, who applied radar to anti-aircraft guns. And this progressed to anti-submarine defense, and the name Operational Research, which is OP, arose. Numbers then began to replace emotions in war and strategy. And that's an interesting, as this rationalization was penetrating through all areas of life. It was penetrating religion, it was penetrating like all the social interactions, bureaucracy, economy, and then this with war. So it goes on to say quickly that the OP differed from science in that they used existing equipment. So in the war, there was already guns. They just were trying to figure out how can make it go faster, or how can they hit this targets and that. Because math just, it really made it that they could do projections of speed and depth and all that to hit targets. And then Quigley mentions that there was many groups involved in all this new way of looking at war, such as the NRDC, the Natural Resources Defence Council, and they had a supreme influence in introducing rationalization into the government and war between 1940 and 46. So this was a real acceleration of this. Then Quigley claims that rationalization methods stood in contrast to, for example, Hitler, and he said, who based his hopes on inspiration on the willpower, on his willpower and inspiration to to do the war, and he often refused to retreat an inch. It's just, and Mussolini used slogans and rhetoric, and the Japanese used self-sacrifice and their willingness to die. And the West was using this rationalization, math, and the development then of the weapons. And that was where it came. Yeah.
It's so obscure, hey? Because it's not really reality, I mean, we all know that the Japanese were very patriotic. It almost sounds like they are the ape men, because they are emotional. It makes so much sense. But yeah.
So Quigley goes on to say that they were developing, even the medical, so that the chances of survival if somebody got injured, if they were on the front, was 97% survival. That was high, and that was the advancements in all the medical treatments they could give on out in there. And then he then Quigley states that the greatest achievement of science during the war was the atom bomb. And he goes on to say that the bomb's contribution to victory was secondary, as it had nothing to do with victory over Germany, and at most shortened the war with Japan only by weeks. But this development of the atomic bomb, everybody can read themselves in it, because he quickly goes into protons and all this physics. And he mentions a lot of people like Oppenheimer and Einstein and Bohr and all these sort of people. But what was interesting too was he went into that for the first time. Scientists weren't able to freely share their knowledge because it became secretive, because it was the war. And they had to keep all the info to themselves. And he mentioned this person, I think it was General Grove or Garth or something like that. I can't forget his name.
McCormack?
No, it was G. And
Leslie Groves was the guy who headed up. He was the. I don't remember what his rank was, but he was in charge of the Manhattan Project.
That's it. Yes. That's the one. I mean, Melissa. Yeah. So he and all these people were. He said he was like really strict, and he kind of was quite insulting towards them, actually, Quigley. And that's when I look at the Quigley sometimes, and I think it's very strange for a formal book to have these sort of remarks where you make that that guy wasn't, he was he wasn't very, he didn't like him, it comes over clearly. But so the scientists but then Quigley remarks that the decision to use the bomb against Japan marks one of the critical turning points in history. And he continues to say this, and this is interesting. He said, scientists that were consulted had no idea how close to the end Japan already was. I'm thinking, trust the scientists, right? Politicians could only think they had no idea. They just thought the atom bomb was a big bomb. They didn't know what it was, the politicians. And they didn't understand science enough. So the decision to use it, the mention again, this General Grove, who Melissa said, he had to justify the $2 billion that was spent. And I think they also wanted to see what that bomb would really do. And I think that some of the scientists maybe wanted to see it themselves, and maybe others didn't. But in here, ethics is completely sort of disappears. And he says here, Quigley, clear, no one involved in the decision to drop the bomb had any adequate picture of the situation. No experts. All right. So it's a non-rational decision. Irrational, if you want. And in it says, Quigley, on the other hand, he says, we had not used the... and he starts to talk about we. We weren't sure. And this is the point where he brings we into it. And in a talk Alan gave, I was wondering, who's we? It's very interesting because you never mention I or me or anything in formal literature. And he's saying we. And then in a talk that Alan gives, he says, when Quigley refers in Tragedy of Hope to we, he's talking about the League of Nations.
Okay.
But he said that if they hadn't done it, we would have been incapable of preventing Soviet expansion. So it was to do with Soviet expansion then as well that they've dropped the bomb. So
I actually thought it was also part and parcel because of Japan was quite a strong country. Like they had to, because they were 2 weeks away from actually not having food. They had no food. They had no fuel. It was unnecessary to bomb them. But Japan was quite strong. I mean, maybe they didn't. When I say a threat, it was a threat to the elites or to the plan of economic power, so to speak. But I could be wrong. It's just my opinion. But yeah, I mean, go on. I don't want to.
No, I think there could be many interpretations of that. But this is what Quigley was saying. This was his his take on it. But
Yeah, because
yeah,
sorry to
no,
interject, because you know what, you remember the Fukushima, because that really came to mind as well, and I was looking into that in particular. Alan Watt did a talk on the Fukushima because it happened on the 11th of March, 2011, and he gave a talk on it on the 15th. And in it, he had this poem, which I have on the screen, which is quite revealing as well, because if you look at and if you listen to that talk, the Fukushima disaster brought on a lot of changes within their renewable energy. And just something else on a very personal note, when I started waking up was around 2011, and the Fukushima disaster was heavy on my heart. That morning I woke up, I couldn't sleep, and something was wrong, and I didn't have a TV, so I put on the internet news, and an hour later this news came in, and it really affected me because I was bothered by it, and I actually did a search in Google. I wanted to know if the Fukushima disaster was man-made, and I typed in, was the Fukushima? That's all I typed, and it populated the rest. Now, because of the industry I work in, I knew it's a wildcard search and it was an organic search. So it's basically, back then in 2011, it wasn't like now they control the search results. I knew it was, if people were searching for this the most, that is what would pop up. And that is what popped up, was the Fukushima man-made. So people were searching for that. And I came across a video from the senior editor of Forbes, and he was interviewing the Prime Minister Naoto Kan, and in it was the day before the Fukushima, and in it he said, we are going to be attacked because we don't want to change our currency and we don't want to implement certain policies. I mean, I couldn't believe it. It was as clear as mud, and then the day after this happened, and he was very explicit about what would happen. I actually tried to save that video, but I don't have it. But this tied in for me with targeting Japan, and wondering also if they maybe stepped out of line, because the same thing happened recently with Abe that was assassinated. I was looking a lot at, in 2021, what was in the news regarding Japan, and it was very similar in the sense that they want to build their country, and they want to invest the economy in their country, within their economy. And so I'm making an assumption there. I don't know. I can't say for certain that's why he was assassinated, but it is very strange. I mean, he was one of the boys. He was a world citizen. He got the World Citizen Award. But obviously he didn't want to play ball, so they got rid of him. But yeah, so just wanted to add that in. If anyone else has any comment, please.
yeah. I know it's interesting, and I was wanting to add something about still the Puritans, right? And this stuff that goes on, and it's that I don't know where I found this, but it says priests are the products and the executors of rationalization, and it's this connecting the rationalization still to religion. It's the Protestant Calvinism. It was through it. But there's one thing I would like to say, and it's something I've come across in the book with Quigley a lot, because he'll say, oh, we never thought that would happen, or oh, we thought this and then that happened. And it's in relation to this being science and the age of experts, and how all these elites think that they know what they're doing, and how and it came to this point in a book, and it says here, Calvinists did not consciously seek to create a capitalist system. right? That was a consequence of it, of the way they lived, the way they practiced their religion, they collected the money and they built it into capitalism. So capitalism was an unanticipated consequence of the Protestant ethic. The concept of unanticipated consequences had broad significance in Weber's work, because he believed what individuals and groups intend by their actions often leads to a set of consequences that are at variance with their intentions. And that's what I think with all this stuff, with all through the whole Quigley book, that people, that there's unintended consequences that are happening all the time. And it's like the creators of these things, they have little or no control, because everything soon takes a life as its own, and it just gets legs to walk on them. And it's very interesting to see through the whole book, like that this is what's been happening. But maybe this is a good point as well, Andrea, where we could sort of ask people to come with some contributions, because we've gone through a lot of stuff, and maybe some people would like to have their voice, and it'd be interesting to hear. So
and also, just to comment on what you're saying, it's quite scary to think that, you know, they almost played by chance as well, hey?
Yes, I think that, and I think that's what you're saying with a lot of the comments that you're making. You're bringing that point up, and that's why I thought, oh God, I have to say that one. Get that out.
Okay, has anyone got any comments, any feedback? No one?
How are you doing, Andrea? I think in relation to Fukushima, I remember reading something there not too long ago, in actual fact, about the very real prospect that extremely low frequency from the HARP emplacement, or one of the HARPs, may have been implicated in creating that earthquake, which was just offshore there in Japan.
Yeah, that's how I understood it as well at the time. I really need to see if I can find that video. But yeah, I think HARP itself, I'm not so familiar with HARP, but I think this site has been shut down because they actually advanced onto newer technologies. So it's kind of like too old tech for them to keep it going, which is quite alarming. But yeah, thanks for that, Frank. Anyone else have any other comments? Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that my overall take on this chapter is that life has become so technically specialized that the way that the world works around us has left the average person behind, where we don't have much input of our own that affects anything in our society. With technocracy and the turn to the age of experts, everything is sort of out of your hands, in air quotes, and there is a lack of fulfillment where, you know, I've noticed on YouTube, for example, everyone's going back to trying to see these videos where people are refurbishing and restoring and getting their hands on skills. And I've noticed how popular those types of videos are, and I've actually found myself gravitating towards that kind of thing as well, because there's so much that I would like to take. I'd like to have a far more hands-on participation in my own life. And so much of our lives is all you got to do is go and do a job, which is quite specialized, and you get money, and then you can go and get anything you want if you can afford it. And you don't have to have any associated skill to get these various things or pleasures or whatever it is. But it leaves me, I feel that way, and I think a lot of people feel quite sort of like a spare wheel in a greater big rat race, and everything has become morally relative. You can rationalize just about anything as long as it achieves a profit or more power or influence. And on page 865, there are 3 points which Quigley mentions. He says, the growth of the army of specialists foretold by General de Gaulle in 1934 and foreseen by others destroys one of the 3 basic foundations of political democracy. These 3 bases are that men are relatively equal in factual power, 2, that men have relatively equal access to the information needed to make a government's decisions, and 3, that men have a psychological readiness to accept majority rule in return for those civil rights which will allow any minority to work to build itself up to become a majority. I think those 3 points are very, very important. So every single person finds himself in this modern world, this technocratic world. They've become atomized. You are simply just observing things going on around you, and your personal input counts for almost nothing. It's a sense of powerlessness, and you see that people who really they fully succumb to that, to the consequences of that. You see it in their actions. So when there is a crisis, they are led by experts. They do as they're told. They don't even feel qualified in their own minds to reject something. And so we all saw how it panned out during the corona. We're living in an age where everything is so disparate that we are now just observers of a fate that we have no participation in. Just wanted to say that.
Can I just agree with you, Darren? I think the way that life is just now, when you're in that circle, go to work, things are out of your hands and everything, you have a very empty feeling. And I think sometimes you go backwards, you go back to a more basic, simple way of life, because I've seen it happen myself the last 4 or 5 years, and you get such pleasure maybe even growing a tomato plant, knitting a jumper.
You could say that with technocracy and the rule of experts is that we have been reduced, we've been emasculated. All of us.
I can see, especially with the men in this country, they've lost their compass 100%.
You want to feel competent in at least one thing,
and
sometimes there isn't one thing. Sometimes you can't really think of one thing.
That's right. And I think that's why people become so easily misled, because they don't feel competent to make an independent choice and decision and say, this is what I think and this is what I'm going to do. And it's so sad. It's so sad, really. So I think if you go back to basics, even if you learn basics, doing a jigsaw, doing a bit of gardening, helping your neighbour, just keep it simple. And that way you can maintain some kind of worth, because it's very difficult otherwise if you're just going to your job and buying meaningless stuff at the end of the month.
And many men who want to try and become self-sufficient and do things that speaks to your sense of self-worth and achieving security for yourself with regards to food. The things that men do, even as a hobby, to try and fulfill that need, like going fishing or hunting, they get mocked. They're playing like boys. It's reduced to playing like children. Meanwhile, if the power grid went down, having a guy around who can go and walk into the bush and come back with some food is actually incredibly valuable.
Your simple skills come to the forefront if everything else goes wrong. That's what I've come to appreciate.
Yeah, I would love to have more skills, and I find myself being fascinated with a lot of YouTube material that teaches you things that you should have been taught when you were young by your
When you were
father.
young. That's right.
Yeah,
That's right.
yeah.
Just basic survival skills that it's a lost art, and there's no value or worth in it in the current society.
Yeah.
You know.
In the world, sorry, Christine, in the world of the technocrat, the world of the expert, I think the one-size-fits-all approach would be taken. And that, in fact, would completely dehumanize us. Completely.
Yeah.
Yep, it's really true. And you've got that because there's these specialists and that, they're without spirit and, no heart. And we're
so they've no soul.
Aye, that's it,
They're
Christine.
lacking humanity. It's the soul, the essence. There's nothing inside them. Nothing.
That is true. I had a comment there about the idea that they themselves, the elite who are planning this and implementing it, that it just that things accidentally happen or take on a life of their own. And I'm not sure how true that is. I was just listening.
I don't believe it either. I don't believe it.
Yeah, I was listening to a talk that I'm actually going to put up tomorrow for the Redux, and Alan was talking to the host about game theory and how they've used game theory to do different things. And see, one of the things about this talk that you two are doing today that is so interesting is that the chapter is so interesting because you're bringing forward the idea of this kind of split, and where Quigley puts it, it's this mechanization or it's the Puritan influence and everything. But I think we could go back hundreds of years. I think we could go back, if I try to put myself into Alan's head, this is the way that it's always been, because he just kept going back and back and back and looking at who it was that was doing this and what they were doing, and had really come to the conclusion that you're not looking at something human here. If you want to call it, just like Russell would describe, they've become a separate species or what. But I think that you're looking at something that is incapable of spirit and emotion and the parts, because you see, humans, we're not rational.
That's right.
We're not. Mm-hmm. So I think true. That there is something there that Quigley tries to make it. Well, I think all authorized historians do this, where what becomes kind of the accidental view of history. But I think especially in war, things are gamed out in advance. They may not know exactly the outcome of this or that operation, but they are marching towards an outcome which they have predetermined, actually.
Yeah, 100%. It's fascinating when you actually watch it. I mean, we're watching the game plan just now, and me and my husband are like placing bets who they're going to go for next. They're going to go for Iran, It's fascinating because the game plan, they plan in advance, and I think the game plan for several different scenarios, so it's all controlled. Just my personal opinion. I might be talking rubbish.
I think that there, obviously, there's always going to be room, even in the best laid plan of psychopathic monsters, for, an accident, or what they might call a way. Let's put this crisis to our advantage. But I think that they exert a lot more control over outcomes than we can even really imagine, which speaks to exactly what Darren, what you were all talking about. I mean, this week I dug up a little bitty bed that was overrun and really got in there and pulled out these huge roots, and I made it look totally different by the time I was done. And I realized that was more satisfying to me than anything I do in front of the computer.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. You get a satisfaction of seeing a job from the beginning to the end, making a cake, anything stupid. Well, silly, trivial things, but you feel that you're learning something and you're doing it yourself. Simple things.
You feel like you're participating in your own life.
Yeah.
The modern world, I think back on all the mornings I've gotten out of bed and I've followed a routine, and then I get in my car and I go and do the same thing I've done for 30 years. And it's kind of meaningless. I do everything in during that day to distract myself from this simple-minded task. I'm living in a completely. I've got one foot in the system where I have to earn money, and my other foot is living. I'm living, as Alan said, I'm living in my head. I spend the rest of my time reading or studying, just to try and find meaning. Because I look at some of the people that I know, basically, they're systematized. They love to get up in the morning and chase that carrot. It's like a dog that never gets tired of fetching a stick. And, we are far more sophisticated than a dog. We need so much more.
You need
and
more
these people will have,
stimulation, you need more challenge.
But these people, I see them and I'm fascinated because they don't seem to get exhausted or tired or bored, and they've got one hobby. So they live for their job. They do this thing, and it occupies 90% of their mental turnover during the day. If you try and have a conversation with anyone at work during the day, you can't get past the basic mechana of their daily task. There's nothing more to them. There's no depth.
Yeah.
It's very, very alien. I've always felt very, very alienated in that way alone. And then they've got one single-minded hobby, which they'll play with until they die. And that is the life of the modern man in a technocratic world. And when something new comes along, they just adapt and they fetch the next. Basically, they're just being trained like a dog to fetch the next technical stick.
But Darren, do you find it fascinating to watch? Do you find it fascinating to observe it?
It's fascinating, but it's deeply depressing.
Disturbing.
I don't let it get me down. Like I'm not walking around in misery, but I am kind of divorced from the real world. I do my job using, I promise you, I just use one little part of my brain. The rest of me is not at work. I'm not there.
Darren, I understand exactly what you mean. I retired about 4 years ago, but I spent 31 years of my life going into a job that I hated.
Yes.
It was a mental health nurse.
It was
like going into hell every morning, honestly, for me personally.
The hell is that it's so repetitive and so similar to, so every day feels like, what's that movie, Groundhog Day? You feel like you're living reality, the same.
The same hamster wheel every single day.
Yes, and if you had to trade a job with somebody else, that job is the same. It's very narrow.
Yeah, that's right. Once you learn the ropes, it becomes just a task.
Very, very, very easy. In actual fact, Andrea showed me a little funny video on YouTube. It was quite disturbing because it was a monkey that was dressed in a little outfit, and it had a little trailer, little trolley, like and it was wrestling with a watermelon, and it would take the watermelon and put it on the little trailer. Then it would go and get the nearby goat, and it would harness the goat to the little trailer, and then it would actually drive that little trolley with the watermelon to the market where there were humans, and then the little monkey would struggle and unload the watermelon and give it to the person, and the lady there gave the monkey some money. And I thought to myself, haven't we been trained just like that monkey?
Definitely.
And I thought to myself, that's a monkey. That's a little monkey, and it's doing a human activity which we have to do every day in that repetitive way. I thought,
But I do
that's a
feel there's a class of people, there's an overclass of wherever they are,
yeah.
and that's where they
Yeah.
look at. They look on us as monkeys.
They look at us just like that. Yes, yeah.
Anyway.
Prison planet, Darren.
Yes, yeah. And that's the thing. A lot of these jobs that we do could be done by a well-trained monkey. Sorry to say it. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, as I say, you get more pleasure out of growing a tomato plant or knitting a hat.
Yeah.
You know, there is something else that the two of you were talking about, and I'm just where you've got the screen saved here on the ITU in religious terms and in technological terms. You said, or it says here, Quigley is observing a broader shift in society towards focusing on the material physical world and the fulfillment of human needs through technological and industrial advancements. As people increasingly emphasized the fulfillment of bodily and material desires, they sought to improve living conditions, indulge in more comforts, and enhance their experiences of food, movement, and emotions. And when you were talking about Puritanism and Calvinism and this predestination, it reminded me of, I was just remembering something that my father had said to me one time many years ago when I called and was just checking in to see how they were doing. And he said, "Oh, I'm doing really great. Business is great. God has blessed me." And I couldn't help myself. I said, "So God is Santa Claus." And, we had a little bit of a conversation about that, but I said, so if you're not doing well in business, then God doesn't love you. That disconnect has always been there for me, because I see, the very thing that people go to try to find meaning and purpose in their lives is very often religion. And the religion has been taken over by this mechanistic thing. If you do a certain set of this, then God is going to bless you. And Alan and I read years ago a really great book called Bright-Sided. And the author, Barbara Ehrenreich, I think was her name. She is talking, it was specific to the US, but she was talking about how this kind of Calvinistic thinking and religion made people work very hard and mechanistically, but also made them always be looking at the bright side. If you do the right thing, God blesses you, and so forth. And when I read that, I thought, this is exactly what the New Age religion is. So it's like all of our escape from the technocratic controlled system has been covered in the way that it has been unfolded to us, because what we crave, I think, is some kind of a mystical experience, some connection to the divine, some recognition that we are more than flesh and blood, and that there's something else going on, because that is truth, actually, and we know it deep down inside. But no matter where you go, they've got that covered. So if it's the New Age, believe me, I've been around plenty of those people. It's like, well, don't be negative. You've got to get on a higher vibration. But there's no difference to me in that than in thinking that God is rewarding you because you've worked hard.
As far as the spiritual goes, Melissa, look what they're doing at the moment and closing all the churches. I mean, what better way to be sort of uplifted spiritually than to go into a magnificent cathedral or something, and you have all the iconography around you of spirituality, and you just maybe sit there in silence, few quiet prayers or something like that. That's all being viciously attacked now.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, and I think scientism is what they want to bring in with a one world religion, because as very as this was going on in the 19th century was when Baha'i faith was actually initiated, shall we say, and Baha'i faith is really about. I was reading this quote. I put it here. Let me just quickly go there and get it. So I don't want to misspeak it. Where is it? They were saying like, if religious beliefs and opinions are found contrary to the standards of science, they are mere superstitions and imaginations. So basically, that's like saying, okay, here are all the religions, and now above it all, we have science, because Baha'i faith is really a faith about science. It's actually science. It's not Scientocracy. Or, what is that one that Tom Cruise followed? But it's not
Scientology.
Scientology, thank you. But it's basically putting science above the values and above principles and above even like a relationship or kind of a relationship with God. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that. That was it. That was it. Okay, shall we?
Well, that I just want to say, Andrea, that was a good point at the end with that one, because that's what I think you've been saying before when we were talking too, that they're trying to bring in this new religion because they need religion, and again to fuel the development of society, plus to get us to like believe in predestination so that we'll work or whatever, take the chip. But yeah, very good, because I don't know that much about that religion, so that was good.
Yeah, there's this link that was sent on the Cutting Through the Matrix chat by Sutter, and it was quite an interesting find. I discovered it off that link, off the back of that, and it basically showed a list of how all the terms and conditions have changed from the United Nations. And it was really the brainchild of me wanting to do this timeline, because in that article, I've got it here, and I would really recommend that you guys just have a look through it. It's very thorough. It basically shows the timeline of when little things have been changed that are important to note. And one of the things that really stood out for me is, because we all know that they have these NGOs, right? So the NGOs are a private agency, sponsored, privately funded. A lot of them are funded by the Rockefeller Foundation. And they are then brought in the United Nations. And by the way, the United Nations, of course, is an NGO in itself, because it's also a private agency, privately owned agency. But they are brought in to be consultants. And this is basically giving you a list of how it had changed. So like in October 96, a formal request for the General Assembly to examine the participation of non-governmental organizations in all areas of the work of the United Nations. So they've basically moved from, we're a consultant, we're not participating, we're just giving advice, to now we are participating. And it goes on. And then they are talking about where is it? Social, the civil society. Okay. So NGOs have been has had a consultative status. Okay. But now they are bringing in something else. So the consultative status changed to participation, and NGOs are changing to CSOs. So CSOs are civil society organizations. So what are they? And this is an important inclusion. And by the way, this is one of those that happened like December, just the day before Christmas, that they passed this. It's such this classic, the same as always. And this is an important inclusion. See, while an NGO is a CSO, a civil society organization, but a CSO is not necessarily an NGO. As CSOs also include community groups, trade unions, faith-based organizations, professional associations, social movements, and any other group formed by people in civil society working towards common goals. So now we can see they are starting to bring in different religions within the United Nations. And I think it's quite timely because we know that they are, in my opinion, setting up the whole Middle East. If they want to get rid of religion, they need a religious war. Just like the League of Nations failed because the nations didn't want to unite. So they had a war amongst the nations, and then after that was a problem, a reaction. The solution was the United Nations. And in the same way, you can see Iran is a religious state, Israel is a religious state. So you have the three Judeo, Christian, and Islam groups, and that can cause a war, and it can then lead perhaps to an ultimate, let's unite religion and let's rather do it logically like we've done before. And they will bring the same reasoning in, scientism, and this is kind of like a complete way of bringing in a new order. And I just, anyone that would like to comment?
Andrea, with the NGO status moving to civil society organizations and their increased participation now becoming recommendations and almost like there's your governance. It's coming in. They are coming in as experts, and they are going to infiltrate the role that government has been supposedly running society with representatives that consult the people. So you can see how that with these organizations that are given more they've got far more power to act, and not just to recommend, but to actually enforce things. So they're coming in 1,000 different directions from as experts, and they sort of bypassing democracy and coming in as a replacement for government. Yeah.
Yeah, they've got participation now, not just giving consultancy.
Yeah, the NGOs, in my humble opinion, Andrea, are designed to do an end run around national governments. They will come in under the banner of under a globalist banner. It's global to local, for sure.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, well said, Frank.
Also, speaking of NGOs, I do want to actually just highlight a particular company, because this is really using science. You've got data.org, which was formed in 2020, and they were sponsored by mainly the Rockefeller Foundation. And this year, I think it's either this year or last year, they've been now made an official partner of the WHO, and they are in particular assisting with the planned, the planned pandemic preparation. It was first the pandemic treaty, then they changed the name to preparedness pandemic treaty or something like that. So, and one of the interesting things about this particular company is the two main sponsors are MasterCard and Rockefeller, but they've also had like the Wellness Trust, they've had Microsoft, they've had the Royal Society sponsor them, obviously the WHO is a partner as well. So yeah, this is moving forward, how they are going to use data and science, because it's going to be the experts. And it's very interesting because basically they are sponsoring their own startups, and then they are saying, let's turn to the experts, the scientists, but they are themselves actually sponsoring them. If you actually dig into it, it's laughable almost, even though I want to cry. But yeah, the Rockefeller Foundation and World Health Organization announced partnership to expand global pandemic preparedness in the era of climate change, because climate change is going to be the new pandemic. So this was last year in May. And another one that Rockefeller had: can data science create social equity? These 9 organizations think so, and data.org was one of them. Yeah, I just wanted to mention that, because I think that is really one to keep your eye on. Very much so. Anyone else want to add any comment?
Just want to add, they're doing a beautiful job of dismantling the old religions to make way for the new. It's just what's happening. It's just, and I'm not particularly a religious person. I never used to go to church or anything, but wow, what they're doing in the Church of England, and just it's they're doing a beautiful job.
Yeah. So yeah, I just, before I forget, would like to mention the Open Society. The Open Conspiracy, because H.G. Wells became quite overtly pro-scientific government, and he discussed this idea of a scientific government in this book, The Open Conspiracy, and he explicitly says it in the New World Order book from 1940. And in it, he basically envisions a society that's governed by scientifically minded experts, and that they apply rational and empirical methods to social organizations. And one of the things that he said was, the Open Conspiracy is a scheme to replace governments with more competent directives based on scientific knowledge. It seeks to replace the ancient and inherited and legally antiquated machinery of government by well-informed and scientifically minded people. And another thing where he says, this is my religion. The world is sick of lies and blood-stained laws. It can be saved only by a world government ruled by sane science and common sense. But yeah, something that I actually realized as well was that one of the reasons that they are changing language, one of the reasons they are using facts and data, because facts don't lie, is because they want to change our perceptions. And this is like, I don't know who was mentioning it just now, because I couldn't see who was speaking, but yeah, if we do get back to nature, and if we are actually doing day-to-day things, and like Melissa said, we're not on the computer, we are actually using our senses to perceive. And a lot of times, if you come home 9-to-5 job, you're not really going to use your senses if you sit in front of a TV. It's all super don't have the word now, but it's insane sensationalism that is imparted onto you. And something else, because if we actually have a better understanding of not just our environment, then we actually have a better understanding of who we are. I don't like the words being present, but just to be actually present and be living is one of the things I think is very important. Anyway, okay.
Andrea, I think that book, The Open Conspiracy, is available as a reading list on
On Alan, what books?
the open conspiracy.
Okay, thank you. Just want to mention this quote. So this is quite interesting. It's also from H.G. Wells. He was saying, the character of the open conspiracy, the movement towards a world collective, will now be plainly displayed. It will have become a great world movement, as widespread and evident as socialism and communism. It will largely have taken the place of these movements. It will be more. It will be a world religion. That really sums it up for me, because what he is saying is you have socialism, or you have the free world, and you have communism, the dialectic, these two opposing forces. And what happens is he's referring to this great world movement. And we all know that Alan Waters mentioned that the great work is what they often refer to as their agenda. So this great world movement will eventually replace socialism and communism. And this great movement is going to become a world religion. So I would hypothesize and say, yeah, this great world movement is basically this Scientology that they are implementing now, which is also the thread within the religion that they want to implement. So, yeah.
Okay. You know, just popped into my head really quickly the talk that I was listening to again that I mentioned, and how long this has been going on, and who is it, what is it that's behind this? Because in that talk, Alan was mentioning Malthus and how long we've been studied, and this need to study us in a quote scientific end quote way, that the people in the poorhouse, like where they were sleeping in dormitory style, but I don't know that they had beds, they were really on the floor. He said they studied to see how closely or how far apart the person needed to be for the lice to travel from one sleeper to the next.
Gosh.
And it is crazy, and it's horrifying, but it shows, I mean, that's like what, 150 years ago, I don't know the date on that, but it shows you that this scientism technique has been used by them for a long time. And what's chilling about that quote that you just read from H.G. Wells is that it would appear that the next thing is that they want all of us to agree that this is worthy of worship.
Yeah, but in a very rational, logical way. Ratio. Because if you look also at rationale, that talk we did, Melissa, which is the compass, which is what William Blake tried to depict and warn people of, which is your reason. This is your reason, which is whom he refers to as God creating the world, but it's actually the villain, not the protagonist. I've wondered also because Alan Watt mentioned the League of Nations. I'm going to read this quote. And it goes back to John Dee. This is John Dee. He was born in 1527. And because what comes to mind is that this interconnected trade, it reminds of John Dee's vision. And the banking and financial control, like Quigley argues that the banking situation, particularly those in Europe and the United States, played a pivotal role in shaping the global governance. This is the actual powers that be. And with the rise of central banks and the financialization of the global economy, power became more concentrated in the hands of a few. And this is exactly the same thing that happened back in the day. Remember, with the trade routes, the the individual companies became quite powerful and the countries became quite powerful of other countries. So let me just quickly read here. So Alan Watts said in 2007, he said, the League of Nations was definitely set up to be the embryo of world government based on the British system of free trade and interdependence, a concept going back to John Dee, who first coined the term British or British Empire and proposed the system to Queen Elizabeth I of a world empire. To sell the idea of a world empire, you must bring in all leaders from all groups, and when you don't have enough groups to give it to some sort of public official backing, then you create the group that speaks on the public's behalf, which is what they've done with the United Nations, that's speaking on the public's behalf. So this idea is going back quite way back to the 16th century. And what I wondered was, where did he get his ideas from? Because wasn't John Dee quite into conjuring up spirits, and he got this guy Kelly to conjure up spirits? And you kind of wonder, was there a spiritual aspect to where these ideas are coming from? Or was it just some bits that have been handed down from centuries before? Because obviously they do come from Plato and so on. But yeah, I mean, it was just what I was wondering, because I do find there is something non-human there, all of this that is orchestrated, because even the way that it's being done, it does not concern with the welfare of human beings like humans would do. It's a completely narcissistic and psychopathic approach, all of it.
See, Andrea, to me, these are the most interesting discussions, and the ones that I think are where I'm interested in putting my thoughts, because this is exactly what they don't want us thinking. And they've trained us to be embarrassed to have the conversations, especially when you find yourself not putting it in a way in which it is culturally acceptable. Because if you're going to talk about entities or beings or demonic, then people naturally assume that you want to talk about Satanism. In other words, there's not really a lot of room to move here, because they've painted a box where you're either a rational materialist atheist or you're a Bible thumping, so to have the conversation in a way that just entertains the possibility or allows you to have the room to say, what are we looking at?
Yeah.
What are we looking at? And Alan would ask those questions a lot. I mean, even though he was very careful in the way that he would ask them, simply by saying something like, what are we looking at?
Yeah, because, well, one of the things that comes to mind is that the elites, from listening to Alan Watt, they have this belief in reincarnation. And what is not clear to me, because you see, actually, interesting also, Darren and I were having this conversation on this very topic this week. And what is difficult about it is it's not veridically, we can't verify it. It's unveridical. And how do we know? How can we truly prove that the elites believe in reincarnation, unless we've spoken to someone or witnessed it ourselves? But they obviously believe in reincarnation, even to the point that they have for centuries been breeding themselves in order to keep their lineage, in order to create, as Alan Watt was saying, this perfect body. But the information with regards to that are all trickled and it's all broken. And it's very difficult to really verify things. And I think this is also why, Melissa, people don't touch on the topic. you know, because it's almost like everything is opinion. How do you, you know, how do you go down that route? Yeah, I don't really know what else to comment
Well,
there.
it's, you know, I think the thing of it is that you can only talk about your experiences. See, the trouble with a lot of conversations about belief and religion and theology, that is because you're discussing tradition or the texts that come out of tradition. So you're proscribed, that, you know, confined to that discussion in that way. So the only way to have it be a productive or creative conversation is if you're speaking from your experiences. But as Alan told me repeatedly, you cannot share your experience with someone else. They have to have that experience themselves. So if you're speaking of your experience and it is an experience of something supernatural, or he would say, once I heard him say on a show, you know, anything that you can experience is natural because you've experienced it, therefore it's natural. But supernatural, mystical, some experience that is outside what you might call the everyday norm, you can't share that with someone else. So really, you can only have these kinds of conversations with people who have experienced similar.
But,
and I think, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. No, just what came to mind is that truth is absolute. It is not your truth and my truth. And if truth is absolute, then it should align with experience, shouldn't it? But this is where it becomes murky, I guess, because what has even happened today is experience is what the elites with their thinking and the science way of thinking forced us to move away from. And we are not that experienced because we also do not know ourselves, and we do not trust our own instincts enough to be confident to stand on certain points, shall I say.
You're absolutely true that truth aligns with in that way, but it's almost like a dead language. You see, it's been stamped out. So it's trying to find, like, here we're in a group, so we feel pretty comfortable here in this little group. Let me venture out. If I'm speaking to you as I have to Darren and Andrea one-on-one, I may be very forthcoming with my experiences, but I think we hesitate because we have been shaped into agreeing that this is going to open us up to mockery.
Yeah, and I'm sure that Alan Watt also didn't share everything, I'm sure. It's very difficult because the other thing as well, as I was saying to Fiona earlier today, not everyone is ready. You know, you have to kind of relinquish certain bits of your identity. If you're into climate change and you suddenly realize this is a bit of a scam, yeah, your identity has been ingrained, and it's like someone is pulling the rug under your feet. And if you don't have anything to stand on, you're going to there's going to be harm done to the core of who you are. So it's almost like we are, in a way, also collectively moving together, slowly but surely, but in a way we are. Yeah, it's a difficult conversation. It's very difficult.
This is why Alan had said years before he started speaking in the first place, he was working with people one-on-one and in very small groups. And ultimately, that would be his preferred way to communicate and work with people, because we have to see where people are. I mean, it helps if you're face to face. You can see where someone is becoming uncomfortable if you go someplace, but it's difficult to do. It's difficult to speak publicly about these things, for sure. But it's even in a small group. I mean, Alan was very clear about that. You really have to know where somebody's coming from, and often the willingness to talk about these things, even to have had some of these experiences. There's not always, but there is often something in the person's life that has stripped them down to the bone. I mean, I'll just speak to that. My own experience is when you've, I don't want to say tried everything or done, been there, done that. That's not exactly it. But when you keep going on some kind of self-exploration and, okay, I tried that and that wasn't what I was looking for. Eventually you reach a place where you're a little bit, maybe broken is the best word, but your defenses, your egotistical need to defend yourself from truth, you just can't prop it up anymore. And that's when the light comes in.
Melissa, I can only for myself, when I realised I was being lied to, it was only 4 or 5 years ago, and it was like a shock. It was like being hit with a brick, and I felt ill for 3 weeks. It was horrible.
Sure.
The realisation, wait a minute, everything that I've not believed in, but what I thought was normal, it was like the ground had opened up underneath me. It was shocking, and it must be very difficult for people. It's very difficult to accept that you've been lied to.
Well, broken is a word that Alan would use. He would say broken. He even said to me one time in musing, I wonder if it is a prerequisite for really understanding to be broken, because I call it like jumping off a cliff, but there's those little branches that are hanging out on the cliff wall. And sometimes I think the rabbit holes that we want to go down, or the causes that we might want to get involved in, or the things that we think might be a solution to the dilemma that we woke up and found ourselves in, are those branches. And it's really the willingness not to grab hold of them that allows you to go deeper and deeper in the journey of seeing where you are and how you were complicit in the lie.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, because that being honest to yourself, because I think the sense that I get is that, and speaking from my experience, is when you are not fully conscious yet, there are always a hint. There's always something that kind of like, wonder why that is. Or you might walk into a bookshop and there's a book that intrigues you and you buy it. But there's always these little nudges or little pushes.
Andrea, the people that are thinking like that, like you've just described, people who are asleep don't have that at all. That never happens.
Okay, but what I mean is, when I was not fully conscious, I say asleep because that's the only way I can describe it. I wasn't fully awake, shall we say.
You were stirring,
Yeah. Because even up until a certain point, I was blissfully ignorant. And when I did start to wake up, it was actually almost like your subconscious is coming up into your conscious. And if you allow it, it is if you are truthful enough to yourself, with yourself, and then that will come up. But yeah, Melissa, I hear what you're saying. It's almost like if you've gone through the dark night of the soul, or if you've gone through some experience where you've either relinquished your old ideas, or you've come to a breaking point, or you've come to a turning point, whatever it might be. But it gets to a certain point where you then where you are able to see the bigger picture, in a sense. It's like I was talking to Fiona, saying, you know, we were just talking about death, and that death sobers the mind, that it's better to go to a house of mourning, because there's something there that is not suppressing, that's not jovial, like you're not suppressing the gravitas of the situation or of the reality that you're living in a sense.
That that is a really key point there. A death does do that if you are prepared to see it for what it is, if you are not sanitizing it, if you're accepting it. And I think that's what is so fascinating about this chapter 16 for me, is that Quigley inadvertently opens a lot of doors to see things even differently from the way he's trying to steer you. At least that was my experience in reading the chapter, because he's presenting all of these ways in which, was it possibly here that we started to think about things differently? Is it possibly this kind of system that makes people seek pleasure and so forth, the way that he's describing this new age, allowing people to have these creature comforts and so forth? And yet I think that has always been the big impediment into being fully conscious. I think that's one of the reasons why Alan called money the first con. And he called it the root of all evil, and people corrected him. No, it's the love of money. No, he said, no, money is the root of all evil. And I think it's because it's not just the ancient bankers and the control elite and the middlemen who run it and so forth. It's the fact that in that system of exchange and that system that you have to accumulate and to acquire and so forth, even little people like us, and I think we'll all recognize this and see this for ourselves, we can use that as a tool to buffer us against reality. So it's like, if I can, just like what Darren was saying earlier, you go to work, you're not really fully there, but then you're in that system. And what does that system allow you to do? It allows you to have your toys, or your one hobby that you're totally focused on, or that thing that, in other words, money keeps you like a child, because it allows you to put the little cocoon around you that makes you feel comfortable and safe and secure. And the more you have of it, the more comfortable, safe, and secure you feel. And that really is why it is evil and a con, because it's that separates you from your fellow human. If you've got a little bit more than him, you're going to suffer a little bit less than he.
It's interesting, Melissa. And I met this guy the other day in the shop, a young guy, and I was just sort of leaving, and he said to me, "Look at the sky." And I looked out the window, and he says, "Don't you see that beautiful sunset?" And I says, "Yeah, I do." He says, "Yeah, I wish I could get out of here." He says, "And take pictures. I bought this phone, and I'm having to work the extra shifts to pay for it. And this phone has an amazing camera. That's why I bought it." So there's this kind of, also, you trap yourself. He's bought this phone, got this camera, and yet he can't go out and take pictures and enjoy that sunset, because he's got himself in the materialistic possession thing. So it's interesting.
Buy our own chains.
Fiona, what you said is fascinating, because I've actually heard people say it directly to me. They go out and they buy themselves a car or a it's normally a car or a boat or something, and they have to borrow money. They can't afford it, but they have to get themselves into debt. And they say to you, it's the only thing that's motivating me to work is that I have to pay off this car. If you think about it, it's absolutely insane. It's pure insanity. It's the only motivation in life to go to work to do the same boring thing is to pay off some luxury item that they can't afford. And it gives them motivation. If that's their motivation, then their life, there's nothing to their life. It's very sad.
Yeah. Yeah.
The other day, I was listening to Alan Watt, and it's in May of 2010, and or is it June? In one of those months, and in his he gives a clip or a link to this. It's called Requiem for Detroit, and I read chapter 16, and I'm watching this documentary, which I had to hunt for. I had to go like 1, 2, 3 deep into Google. I looked everywhere, and I finally found a link, and I can watch it from Russia. Anyhow, when you watch that, it's exactly what you're talking about, how they built up Detroit to be the manufacturer. And you could see step by step from the 1800s with Henry Ford and how they built the city, the people living in the city, and they made it so posh and bougie. And then they built the suburbs, and they brought in the other, they made the 4 major car makers. It is insane. And then little by little, they just start taking it away. It's just, like you said about this gentleman, they go into debt for something, the reason that they work, but we're well-trained slaves. Aren't we just such good, well-trained slaves?
That's interesting, Faith. Thank you.
I had a little dog. His name was Tuffy, and I have enormous respect for him because I would pick up a stick on the beach and I would throw it, or a ball. But after the 3rd or 4th one, he just couldn't be darned. He said, I'm not going to do that again. I'm going to go sniff over there and explore over there. I thought, that's a good boy. You're actually you're having your own experience as a dog. And I think of all the human beings that just run for the stick, bring it back, run for the stick. And that's the monetary system with debt and buying toys. There are people that just remind me of these happy dogs that never, ever, ever, not once get tired of fetching a stick. That's all we're doing in this modern world.
He lived up to his name.
Oh, that's interesting. It kind of gave me an association there back to the rationalization. Because we as human beings, when we're in this system of working or in a shop or, in a job, take a teacher, they've never to give their own opinion. Say you're working in like the social welfare department, they'll tell you never ever get emotional. So if somebody's telling you the problems, don't get emotional. So you have to be instrumental and rational and all these things. So when we're actually reacting with people, it's very difficult for us to move between these different kind of spheres, and I think you maybe get sort of cut off from actually being proper human beings to each other and then properly knowing how to act. Like to enjoy the sunset, to, not be like to be able to say, no, I'm not running after that stick. It's very difficult for people because you're taught, well, this is how you're meant to think. You're meant to want this stuff. You're meant to be in such and such a way. And you can't really communicate properly with other people because you've been trained to be kind of, what would you say, non-emotional, perhaps.
You're almost seen as you're seen as professional if you're not emotional, right? In fact, you're rewarded with a good title there,
Yeah.
Okay, shall we move on to the Carroll Quigley book? Let's just see. Let me just check. Fiona, is there anything else you wanted to add?
No, and honestly, Andrea, I think it's I've said. Do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I just want to let me just quickly get to just see. Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to quickly touch on. Let me just see here. The patterns. Just wanted to mention a few things on where does this apply to today. Just in summary, so the patterns that Quigley was referring to was more like, cyclical. Like in history, you see the same patterns repeating. So he was, for example, in context to the Roman Empire, stating that the Roman Empire went through like expansion. It went through prosperity. It had trade, infrastructure, and cultural achievements that flourished. And then it went through a stagnation. And eventually it went through a decline. But he was saying that these historical cycles happen quite often. If we think about the Roman Empire, you can almost say you can recognize those similar patterns happening today. I mean, you have Jacques Attali speaking about the crisis of humanity and the economy of death. You have an artificial austerity being created, money being pumped out from every Western country into Ukraine. If they can type in any amount of number on a keyboard and create any amount of money for Ukraine, why then do they take it from the people? It's because they want to create this austerity. So they want to bring in, of course, a new economic system, the new digital currency. It's like these cycles are almost induced. That's what it seems like to me. So I just wanted to mention that. He also talks about just a few things here. The scientific approach, the scientific thought, rationalization. I was thinking of how does this apply today? Like where are we seeing science evolving, shall we say? And what came to mind is the AI healthcare, the AI-driven diagnostic tools, because everything these days is AI. Even the software that I use on a daily basis, like every 5 minutes you have a thing popping up. Do you want to use AI tools to help you da-da-da-da-da? And it's just very intrusive. It's going to be very hard for the next generation to not be completely bombarded with AI. I think it's going to be like the calculator. People won't be able to do maths like they did in the past. So yeah, you've got the healthcare system. There's loads of them popping up. So London Medical Imaging and AI Centre for Value-Based Healthcare are working with Answer Digital to provide AI platforms to support clinicians with faster diagnosis and treatments, personalized therapies, and effective screening across a range of conditions and procedures. And also, if you look recently, Google has now turned to nuclear in order to support its AI data centers. The same as with Amazon. They've also invested $500 million to develop a small modular reactor. And it's all heading towards this Internet of Things, because obviously they need nuclear in order to have Internet of Things, Internet of Bodies, and to constantly be online, that constant data feed, which is an extension of this automation that Quigley was talking about. So yeah, the other thing, of course, as I mentioned, was data.org. Data.org using data to drive the preparedness, pandemic preparedness policies for the WHO. And that is pretty much it. I think, Fiona, we've covered all of it, haven't we? Pretty much. What we
Yes,
wanted to
I
say.
think so. And I think your presentation was wonderful, Andrea. Totally
Thank
impressed. I am like totally digitally incompetent. I'm a paper and pen girl. So I was really impressed too. Thank you so much.
you.
Yes, Andrea. I didn't know what you were busy with upstairs, and my mind is blown. The details and how you link the text with the graphics and the graphics themselves are they're just so good. Well done. If I do a talk like this, are you going to do the graphics for me?
What did I get myself into? No, thanks, Darren. Do you know what?
Well done.
That thing you were saying as well, about us wanting to kind of go back, and want the authentic bits of life. This is the irony. Do you see this graphic here? So I use Pinterest. I've been using it for years, and I was searching all of these terms that Quigley was talking about, looking for graphics. And I was literally searching for the atomic bomb, no background. I didn't want a background, I wanted a PNG transparency. And this came up, and I noticed that Pinterest has changed. It's almost as if they are, instead of beforehand, people would just repost their images and you would post what other people found popular, or if you did a search, you found something, or you can follow someone or they can follow you. But now it's become as if you do a search, it's almost like I get a sense that it's generated. It's like they're generating these graphics on the fly, because I've noticed that the quality, everything looks samey. And I got so annoyed. I actually went to other sources just to get some of the imagery I was looking for. I know it's a bit of a different point of view, but when you were saying you wanting authenticity, and I know I'm talking about electronics, but I actually use Pinterest a lot for my art and a lot for references to do paintings and stuff. So I immediately picked up when everything was becoming AI and artificial. But yeah, so yeah, that's me. Does anyone have any comments or anything they want to add?
I'm blown away by both of you, your thoughts, and this graphic timeline is so cool, and I want you to teach me how to do it. It's just the neatest thing. But both of you came very well prepared with lots of great thoughts, and I really enjoyed myself. And it was a nice change from the format we were doing. So thank you.
Two words later. Absolutely fantastic. Wonderful stuff. God bless.
God bless. Thank you, Frank.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you, Melissa.
Thanks to both of you. Thanks for everybody. It's been a lovely evening listening to everybody. Thanks, eh?
Thank you,
Thanks, Steve. Thank you.
Okay, guys.
Good evening.
I'm going to just stay on and save the file, and then I will close the chat after it's saved. But you guys can talk freely if you want.